Fidonet is a strange beast.
One day you called me up and said, "David, I found this really neat thing. You have to check it out."
Yeah.
And just threw our BBS away and brought up Fidonet.
That was a remarkable revolution in BBS for the Fido boards. They were great. Because I mean, you get a message somewhere without having to make a long distance call yourself.
The feeling was just indescribable. The feeling was actually greater than the feeling that I had when I actually first started the bulletin board. You know, I mean, it was like a feeling of, okay, I really am a sysop. I've been accepted by my fellow sysops.
We would literally sleep on the floor in that room waiting for the phone to ring, knowing that we were getting our nightly load of Fidonet info. And it was like, you know, you were always the first person up there to wait, and you would watch the progress meter. It goes, okay, we're done. Let's see who replied to my message, you know.
Fidonet was really our first ability to sort of be in the broader community like the internet feels today.
Fidonet didn't invent something that didn't exist before, but it provided it to a whole new group of people.
Yeah, this is just amazing that we can get mail messages around the world and nobody has to pay anything on all these phone calls.
Fido was really what brought bulletin boards into the modern era. And so be sure and cover that well.
I didn't no idea it was going to become so amazingly large or long-lived. That's the part that gets me. Phoenix Software was, I believe, if I remember correctly, the sole subcontractor with Microsoft to install MS-DOS on various manufacturers' hardware. I would sometimes just get a board nailed to a piece of plywood with a power supply that gives you shocks, no monitor, and CPU and memory, and an EEPROM socket, and a list of I/O ports. And I would burn a PROM on my 8086 machine, and I would stick the PROM in, and I would make the screen clear. You know, then I would go step by step by step and make a machine come up cold. So I had this real concept of hardware-independent device layer. I thought, well, you know, I want to write a bulletin board. I get a spare few weeks. That could be easy. Well, 10 years later, it was still not done. But wrote this bulletin board, and it used the I/O layer I'd done for Phoenix.
Ultimately, that's how I found Tom Jennings, was because I had this DEC Rainbow that needed communication software for, and didn't have any.
John Medill, I don't know how, he ended up calling my bulletin board, said, hey, I got a DEC Rainbow. I also don't have an IBM PC.
And for the first maybe year or so, all I knew was there was this incredibly bright mind on the other end of a keyboard that was typing words to me faster than I could read.
It was very painful. He would tell me some data, I would make a binary, he would download it at 1200 baud across the country, during the day, and we did this a dozen or 20 times, and finally the freaking thing worked.
It was really, it was fun. I mean, I remember a lot of anticipation about that first version, but I don't recall it not working, Maybe that's just selective memory, but it just always worked. And that's one of the things that was amazing about Tom. He'd cut a lot of code, and it worked.
So there's a bunch of Fido bulletin boards, and then John and I were just doing so much keyboard chat, sysop chat crap. It was just making me crazy, and it was costing a fortune. So I don't know where I caught when I remembered that bulletin board to bulletin board message thing.
Tom and I used to talk on the phone frequently. He said I was talking to John Medill and got to thinking about it. He said, wouldn't it be neat if our boards could call each other up, exchange messages maybe exchange files.
There was other talk about this stuff at the time, and I don't recall it. But they were all very complicated schemes. Oh, we must get around this local call business. And I said, well, what does it cost? Just what does it cost? Just did the math. It just wasn't a whole lot of money. Basically, in 1 minute, you could move a couple of K of text or something. So the economics just went that bad. So did the first Fidonet.
We went through this transition where we went from being Fido BBS to being Fidonet.
Tom Jennings had logged in during the middle of the night somewhere along the way, and he'd uploaded a new Fido, another program called Fidonet, and a node list.
You're actually watching two machines coast to coast connect, and error checking and resynchronization and all this stuff. And it's like, this is going to be a big machine. It was fun making a big autonomous machine.
And suddenly we had systems that could call each other up and talk to one another.
How it got spread out after that, because it was just amazing. We went from 2 to I don't know, it seems like 150 in less than 6 months or some such thing. And it just had a momentum of its own and mind of its own. It just spread like wildfire.
When Jennings was running it, somebody'd call him up with a change, and he'd write it down on a post-up, and he'd stick it up on the wall. And maybe he'd see it in a week or so and finally get it edited into the node list, and maybe it'd fall off the wall and he'd never see it at all. And his wall was a mass of post-its. How he ever found anything in what was on the wall, I don't know. He published the node list whenever he felt like it. So there was no way that you knew that a new node list was available. So Ken and I got together over the phone, and I said, we've got to do something about this. So I made a conference call with Ken and TJ. Our position was, you've got to give up this chore and let somebody else do it. So he says, okay, you do it. The node list continued to grow, and by late winter, early spring of '85 now, we've been in business as a network almost a year. And that's when TJ laid the awful truth on us. He had 250 node limit. Well, we were about 230 nodes at that time. And so we started getting panicky. That's when we started talking about, what are we going to do? We're running out of node list space. The node list is becoming unmanageable. It's so big anyway. I took off work, Ken took off work, Tony Clark took off work, and TJ, we all came here, and this is the meeting you're talking about. TJ had some maps in his knapsack, and he pulled out a map of the U.S. All it had was the outlines of the states. And Tony Clark and I got down there with felt tip markers and started carving out regions.
You're into trivia here. Do you know why how the first Fidonet regions in the U.S. were created. It was based on the NCAA basketball brackets.
It was totally arbitrary, really. What we were trying to do was come up with more or less equal populations as best we could guess. We were all prepared for a horrendous horror story when we switched from the amorphous net to the net node concept, because we all did it on the same day.
That sticks in my mind more than anything else when, they had us go from just nodes to net node, and how, they were all so worried about, we're going to do this at like midnight and everything's going to either work or it's all going to blow up, and everybody had to be ready to do the same thing at the same time, and, the good old days.
I figured, it's going to be a catastrophe.
It was the 17th node on the Fidonet, and then they went to regions and nodes, and so then 107 was the New York area, and everybody had to split off. And since I went down to New Jersey, they had changed my number, and I got upset with that because now it's 10727. I went, no one's going to know I was an early starter in this, and here was my point of pride, that I was one of the early settlers on the homestead.
So yeah, it was a giant ongoing software project. It was kind of open-ended. It's kind of fun up until like 92. Almost 10 years.
It was amazing, some of the stories that I was told.
During Desert Shield, and they're doing the build-up in Saudi Arabia. At that point, this is pre-internet. There was a Desert Storm Fido BBS over there. We were doing electronic mail to soldiers stationed in Saudi Arabia. And at the time, this was pretty groundbreaking.
The lure of having stuff sent to me and available for me to read when I wake up in the morning from God knows where on the planet. And yeah, it's the planet because there was stuff popping in from other places. It wasn't just local stuff.
It worked well. I could send, email messages across the country long before anybody heard about the internet. Long before people, what's that?
Basically for free, I could send a message from here to New Zealand, Australia, New York City, wherever.
I remember this one guy, I don't remember where he was, I just knew he wasn't on our continent. I would send a message out to him, and it would take 2 days for the packets to get to his BBS. Then he would reply, and it would take another 2 days for the packets to make its way back to me.
That was a fascinating thing.
You're projecting your presence vicariously out, and you have no idea how far it goes.
When you get to the messaging alone, there's that to field in the subject area. That's the news groups. This is a news group that has a to field in it. And that, for people, has a bizarre effect on people to look at. First off, they look at it and they think, it's not to me, I'm not supposed to be reading this. Okay? But they get explained to them that this is a message that's public. If they wanted it private, they had the option to. So they wanted you to see this. And they thought, well, he did that on purpose then, huh? Okay. And now they want to read because they know that people are seeing it. And that little subtlety in there is just tremendous.
You could do your own filtering. You could decide which echoes you wanted to view, to participate in. You can lurk in any one you want, not say anything, and then come into any one you want, and then project yourself.
One Tuesday a month, second or third Tuesday of the month, we'd meet and get together. It was great because then you could meet with all these people, and everybody was a fabulous mind. You've interviewed a lot of these people. There's no idiots out there except for maybe one or two users.
I think when I used to travel a little bit, and when I traveled, I usually took my node list with me because it was like the greatest BBS list. You could use that, and then find local ones.
We met people all over the world. We had people come visit us from Australia, and they took a trip to the U.S., and what they did was they pretty much traveled around and stayed with other sysops.
There were organizations that used Fido as a means for communicating within different locations in a company. And it was a real cool tool for businesses to use at that time.
If it was if it was a relatively small club of 100 people or 1,000 people that went on for 10 or 15 years, it'd be one thing. But it's like this huge, nebulous, swirling mass of chaos. And when people send me email, it's like from some area I never heard of. Like if there was about a year and a half when I was getting email from .ru domains about Fidonet stuff in Russian to English dictionary language. And Russian is just a complicated language. It doesn't translate well. So I was like, I didn't even know what they were talking about. But it was flattering. It was, it was generally good. They were asking questions, and if I could answer, I'd answer. So just these, so clearly Fidonet was having a little mini something or other in .ru land, and I don't know what it's about.
Just a few months ago, I heard from a doctor in Vietnam. And he said, all the fancy stuff of the internet and all of the rich collection of information on the internet, but that's censored in Vietnam by the government. But phones are not. And he said, do you know I get HIV information that is the latest and the best HIV information anywhere on the planet? He said, and I get that through BBSing because they don't censor the telephone. So they can shut the internet down, but there's still a way in. And he said, thanks. Without Fidonet and Opus, a lot of people would be dying that aren't dying. So that's cool.
You came and went.
Tom is a fictional character that I've read about on the internet and in the Fido News.
The deification of Tom?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say...
Well, sure, everybody thought Tom was the god of
Tom
telecom.
Yeah.
It's really kind of interesting, but we're definitely in a situation where Tom was the creator. And you can look at that from a religious or a spiritual perspective, or you can just look at it as he was being creative, and he created this thing that had a life of its own.
You bet. And when you got to meet him, he was so aloof, just because he's a character. You figure that out after years,
Tom was this incredibly admired individual that put a lot of time into doing something that he believed in. Now, maybe it was just for the excitement. maybe it turned into something. Maybe what everybody thought it was for Tom was nowhere near what it was for him. And I imagine that that's probably the case.
I guess everybody really has their own view of the, quote, Tom Jennings dream.
He did a lot to promote that messianic image. Now, you're talking to him, and this is 20 years later, okay? And we've all hopefully grown up a little bit or changed in a number of ways, but there was no stronger supporter of the messianic image of TJ than TJ.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely chaos.
You know, it was like, yeah, I'm saying this. Let's hear the applause from the wings. That's what I'm saying. You know, and Laura loved him. He deserves kudos for what he did. There's no question about it.
His idea was we were in Fidonet to communicate. I don't think Tom wanted to be the emperor of anything, and I think he'd probably be amused by the idea of people coming to him saying, "Oh, Holy Father, we want you to rule on something for us."
Everybody's going to have their view of what Tom Jennings' dream for Fidonet was. I think really his dream was, in a nutshell, communication. Getting people to communicate. And I think if you really want to boil it down a little farther than that, I'm not really sure that he had a dream. I think he just had an idea that this would be fun to write this software.
It just gets used to justify any old thing, which is kind of flattering that I have this apparent power. In fact, you know, send me checks. Everyone send me checks. So there was this net node thing. The region, the linguistic error I made was calling it a region, with the idea that nets are encompassed in the region. Rather than just being a logical entity, they were taken to be political boundaries. And this gave them this de facto position to assume geopolitical power over sections of the Fidonet. And that started in '84 and was, as far as I'm concerned, the goddamn fucking ruination of Fidonet. The political conniving over region stuff. And the little petty thief stuff. Oh, petty dim-witted bulbs who I still get mail from once in a while.
The technology is easy. It's the politics that's hard.
There was this whole political side that just, whoa, yeah.
I have approached people in the past, hey, how about Fidonet? And they're like, ooh, too much politics, too much fighting.
It's the same crap that's been happening ever since Tom created basically the second node out there. I mean, the politics have been going on since day one. And it's just people that are trying to do their own power plays. It's sad that they're taking a really nice technology and distorting it to their own means.
Fidonet was a good thing. I really enjoyed being associated with Fidonet. The politics killed it.
Instead of getting something accomplished and done, when you put something on the floor, everybody else wants to be part of it, and the only way they feel they could be part of it is by trying to make that thing better. And then you get involved in a bitching competition about how it should be done right. Nothing ever gets done at all, and all that's left at the end of it is just a whole bunch of bitterness.
When you have a small group of people, everyone knows, you know, we might have foibles and differences, but I can see you're working on this, and so things sort of work out. But when you get to the point where you have people who don't know each other, then you get to the point where people perceive that there's an inside and an outside, and they're not inside, and things are being done to them from the inside, and then people scream and yell.
Whereas if you would have said, we're doing it this way, this is how we're going to do it, you people make it work, would have been much better. But no, they could never get themselves to commit to paper on something.
All the nights you sat there after sending flame mail to somebody, you know, oh, I don't want to coordinate with you anymore, you suck, bing, and you'd watch as and you would do a forced drop, right? You would force the upload to the node immediately, and then you'd sit there and you'd wait, and you'd pull the node, and then bing, it would come back, and oh, well, you're an idiot, and you have snakes in your bathroom, and yeah, you'd sit there, and it was so funny to watch. I mean, now you look at it, and it's ridiculous.
But in a region, you would have little hot spots like this, and every now and then, like the Pittsburgh sysops would all be screaming, yelling mad at their NC, and like, I have no idea why. What's the big deal? Does the mail get through or not? It either does or it doesn't. Who cares?
then it just sort of started to become so much flamage. It was like you never were doing anything right. But eventually it became almost a battleground where, well, you can't get it right, but I know I can, and then sort of everyone wanted it. Then it got into, well, we run the right BBS and they run the wrong BBS, so we need you to kick them out.
Private individuals, most of whom had real jobs for real companies and did this in their spare time at their own expense, with their own money, and didn't have time to mess around with all this political stuff. Because I want to be able to turn my computer on, and I want my email to go, and I want my news groups, I want my Echo Mail, and that's what I want. And I don't want to deal with the rest of this stuff. The day my computer stops working, and then maybe I'll get involved.
We're not going to agree. We don't need to agree. The protocols have to run. That's all. We're never going to agree. We shouldn't have to agree. Technically, the stuff works, and if you want to spin off your own network, that's just fine.
But the rest of it, he doesn't give a flying fuck about the politics of Fidonet any longer.
I bet he's disappointed in how things turned out.
You think so? I mean,
if he were not disappointed, I think he would still participate.
It just has to follow these minimal standards. The rest of it, I couldn't give a shit. Who, how, what bad thing they did, whether they're Nazis, Mother Teresa, I just don't care. And it doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. The whole IFNA debacle, it's a very sore point amongst a number of people.
IFNA was originally TJ's idea. In fact, he coined the phrase.
He came up with it. He came up with it. I tell people that.
It was our own doing. I was fully responsible, along with Ken Kaplan and all that, in hindsight, of doing this IFNA debacle, which I'm sure you will hear to no end.
Back in '84, he was talking about an International Fidonet Association, and he wanted it so that he could distribute T-shirts and bumper stickers,
right.
And that's about all he could think of to use it for.
We said we need to be represented. We need to have a little technical appearance in the technical world, and as a group buyer of who the hell knows what, IBM PC insurance, whatever the hell the idea is at the time, we'll have this International Fidonet Association.
We felt that we needed some voice out there. We needed some sort of lobbying voice, or at least some voice that we can bring to government and say, we're out there, this is how it works. You don't need to necessarily recreate laws for this sort of stuff.
Why do we need an IFNA? The answer was so Ken and Ben could legally accept money to help support their efforts with Fido.
Ken's phone bill at that time was monstrous because he was pushing the node list out.
Ken filled out his taxes, and his accountant told him he was going to owe taxes on all the money he had collected in '85.
He was screwed twice, because his accountant told him the donations would count as income, but the expenses wouldn't count as expenses.
It wasn't a huge amount, but it was a non-trivial amount, I'll tell you.
And it was insult to injury.
And
why to report it as income?
Exactly.
So that was one thing that suddenly, and he's already collected he'd already collected by April as much in '86 as he had in all of '85.
It was basically structured so that money could be given in, so that the people who were putting out lots of money for their hobby wouldn't have to put it out. It would be taken care of, so that those central nodes, the modems would be given to them.
But we needed an organizational framework in which to do that, and conventionally that's a 501c3 nonprofit corporation, so that's what we did.
That was the beauty of it. Like, wow, we don't have to charge you for this. It's not even like an ISP to get on. We don't have to charge you. It's like, but we have to have this rule book because otherwise they won't give us this classification. Then corporations will just give us stuff.
I spent all the money that came into IFNA. I was, one individual. I had one P.O. box. I was spending it on postage. I was spending it on, some of it
phone calls
on corporation. I was doing absolutely nothing except for going out of my way to try to cross my T's, dot my I's, and do everything to properly set this organization up.
It was something we all agreed on, and unfortunately it got bastardized very quickly after it got taken over, because everybody feared that this was going to be some organization that was just going to destroy Fidonet.
I got just absolutely, this guy is stealing money. He is, gonna send everybody down the tube, and he's taking Fidonet with him.
I think they saw Ken Kaplan, and these guys saying, he's a good guy, he can be in. He's a bad guy, I don't want him in.
It's horrible. It's miserable. We don't want it. We hate
we
it.
wanted to steal Fidonet.
Yeah.
We had created Fidonet.
We presented this idea of the IFNA, voluntary association, but we blurred some lines. We really fucked up. It would also manage the node list. People saw in this, probably rightly so, the seeds or the roots for future, quote, takeover of Fidonet. So there'd be this, we're nice and all well-meaning IFNA that controls the node list. And then if they decide to charge money later, you've basically commercialized Fidonet. That wasn't the goal at all. That really wasn't the goal.
Everybody had been able to think about it, because I guess they'd announced before this meeting that this was going to be the big organizational meeting of the IFNA, and they'd left people alone way too long to think about what that might mean. And they had already decided not only how horrible it was, but specifically which evil, foul, universal crime against humanity it was going to commit. And when they stood up there, I don't think anybody was more stunned than they were.
What happened was it blew up in front of us. We were like shocked. People are screaming, we're being railroaded, blah, blah, blah.
And then, once that polarization hit, which was within 30 seconds of the first meeting to discuss whether we should do this and whether this was the way to do it, it was spiraling out of control from then on.
It was a whole horrible mess. We didn't understand what was going on.
There was just no good way to please the masses.
So IFNA was a nice idea, ill-conceived. I think on our side, people might have been less altruistic than others. So IFNA, once formed, chugged along under its own inertia. By 86, I think in 86 I did the big embarrassing debacle on the podium. Was very stressful and a painful day.
Yeah, he was not a happy man that weekend.
But we said, you people are fucked. This IFNA stuff. This was the classic animal, George Orwell's Animal Farm. It's like the third or fourth Fidonet conference. And everyone was just a bunch of dorky sysops, right? All a bunch of flabby white guys and 5% women. And we're in some banquet room for this conference, which was very heated. There's all this stuff. There's this evil lawyer involved.
The guy who was running the conference was a lawyer from Denver. And he kept making speeches. And every time he opened his mouth, he made things worse.
Basically, so that we went to this banquet room. Everyone's like, this IFNA thing is getting to be really bad. We walk in. there's all these tables, you know, standard hotel banquet stuff, and then there's a little raised platform with a long table and chairs on it for the IFNA board.
As for the raised dais, nobody did that deliberately. It's just the way the hotel set things up.
So all of a sudden, it was genuinely us and them. And it's like, okay, you said you weren't going to do this, and you did it. They did it. And I was on the board. They wanted me to go, and I simply refused. I said some horribly disparaging thing about it, and other people were up in arms. And then poor Ken Kaplan, because his heart was always in the right place and stuff, always. Poor Ken Kaplan said, okay, that's all, and it just collapsed into chaos. This lawyer, he wanted to just simply fully commercialize Fidonet, period, pay to play. He wanted to charge people to be in the node list. He took me aside just before this meeting and said, you know, we're going to go into this and we're going to have some vote. I forget what the issue was. We're going to have some vote on whether you have to pay or something, whether you have to be a member of IFNA to be in the node list, the pivotal point. And this is up in his hotel room. He said, we're going to vote for it. It's a done deal. If you go along with it, being me, it'll all happen smoothly. If you go along, well, you know, it's going to happen anyways. It'll just be a lot of trouble. And I should have said, fuck you. I didn't say fuck you, but I virtually said fuck you. I said, I'm not going along with this. And then I went downstairs and didn't go along with it. And then that's when legal action started. It was fairly easy for a small number of people to wreak a large amount of havoc. And it's easy also to lose perspective on that and realize that on a large scale, the network crawled on. It breaks up into little pieces and it reforms, and it doesn't really matter. Because underneath there's people who are using the network technology to do something between us, and there's this raging lunacy over here, and they just don't have to look and pay attention to it at all. So that was its saving grace. It just runs in spite of the idiots.
Yeah, well, I know when Ken, and I call it a disappearing act, even though it really wasn't that, but when he just, you know, pretty much had it, I always wondered if he was bitter at the end. I mean, he got screwed.
Yeah.
But then again, they all did.
That's the reason I burned out so early is I am not and never really was a bulletin board sys-op. What I was into was the technology, the creation of technology, the advancement of technology. That's where I got off. And when that started to wear out or slip away or whatever it did, I began to burn out.
What I found is that I was competing for Tom's time when I talked to him about concepts and what have you. And at one point I just realized that I had to let it go, because fighting for space in this wasn't what I had in mind. You know, my involvement was pure curiosity and pure adrenaline and pure excitement. So when it stopped being those things, I fell out of that.
Those jobs are thankless jobs. And yeah, you know, a lot of times you don't get the praise until you leave.
It's so nutty, and you sit there and you're getting cursed at, and I'm not an evil guy. I know I'm not. What the hell? And they eat you up. It's like you're sitting there, and all of a sudden I realize, you know, my wife divorces me because I'm always on the computer, but I'm on for these stupid conference things trying to straighten, you know, and explain myself over and over again. And what am I doing this for? This was supposed to be a nice hobby.
And, you know, whenever you throw up your hands and say, oh, man, I quit, I'm so tired of this, blah. Well, you can't leave. You're the greatest we've ever had, you know. Really? You know, why didn't you tell me that, you know, back then? You know, why do you wait until now? You know.
When we let Fidonet go, we made sure that whoever we handed it off to was someone who was going to keep it going. So I know, when I walked away from it, I knew that, maybe these guys weren't going to keep it flying for as long as I did. But it kept going.
That amazes me more when I found out just recently that Fidonet is alive and well. And
I think as Fidonet is in 2002, we obviously probably have a more mature user base and a mature, at least in years at the very least, membership. The folks that are involved with it now, yes, there can be some parallels that some folks might draw to ham radio or other hobbies that have been around for a while.
We are a dwindling breed, but we're stubborn. I look on that as a badge of perseverance, and I still find value in it.
Do you think there'll be a Fidonet in 10 years?
Absolutely. What it looks like, I don't know. And I'm not even going to try and predict. It'll be smaller, I would bet. But, yeah, there'll be a Fidonet in 10 years.
My thanks to Tom Jennings for writing Fidonet. I mean, that was brilliant software. The concepts that he worked into that were just great. Wonderful stuff.
It taught me that you can't have... I was an anarchist and anti-war and everything, and after that, I understood benevolent dictatorships.
It was the great irony of Fidonet. Fidonet was that Tom Jennings was an anarchist and believed in everybody should just do their own thing. But he designed this networking technology that required a central authority to say who was in and who was out.
People say, oh, Fidonet peaked whenever it had 30,000 nodes, you know, and growing. And then it started dying off. Well, yeah, that's true. You know, I mean, you can't argue with history. The history book is written. You can go back through the node list and see this. But on the same token, I don't see that Fidonet has totally peaked. Fidonet started out as a couple of computers with software that really didn't exist, that was being invented. The software has evolved constantly. So I don't know that really Fidonet has peaked yet.
It's nice to build something that lasts longer than you do. Well, I don't know if it will, but it lasts longer than your current attention span. It's like, oh, that's still going on? Oh, I didn't know. It's like, oh, I left the stove on, the water's still boiling. You know?